The Orioles lost to the Nationals on Tuesday night, but they could be facing an even bigger loss this upcoming offseason in Anthony Santander's free agency. Why the Orioles should be going hard after Santander to bring him back, coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, August 14th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap a tough loss for the Orioles as they fell 9-3 to the Washington Nationals on Tuesday. And I had to tell you what went right, what went wrong, and a shout out to one player on the O's for Tuesday. Then we'll chat a little bit about the Orioles' impending free agents. Anthony Santander set an Orioles record on Tuesday night. We'll chat about that. And what are the chances the O's bring him back? What are the chances they bring their other impending free agents back as well? And then some minor league updates for you with the Orioles. There are a good chunk of guys who have been unfortunately released, a good chunk of new faces in the organization, something that generally happens right around the draft. And we'll try to recap a good chunk of it here on this episode. But it's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So we start today with an Orioles loss. Final score from Oriole Park at Camden Yards on Tuesday night. The Washington Nationals 9 and the Orioles 3 in the first game of a quick two-game set in the Beltway Battle and the Masson Cup. Nats have now taken 2 of 3 from the O's this season. One more game between the two coming up tonight. Orioles dropped to 70-50 on the year. Now, I want to give a huge shout out to the Chicago White Sox, who are hosting the Yankees this week for a 3-game series, and a team that just lost 21 in a row and fired their manager. And I thought, there is no way the Yankees drop a game to the White Sox. Well, the White Sox beat the Yankees 12-2 on Monday night. Shout out to Grady Sizemore, who got his first managerial win in that game. That was absurd. Now, as I'm recording, of course, Yankees, White Sox starting later in a different time zone. It's 3-0 Yankees in the 5th inning. I'm going to go ahead and assume the Yankees will win that game, which would put them back in first by a half game over the O's. But we're going to recap this loss to the Nationals. Going to go back to the what went right, what went wrong, and shout out to format. I do want you to let me know here in the YouTube comments and make sure you are like, comment, and subscribed to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Let me know which format of recapping the games you like better. Generally now on the weekends, for the weekend recaps and the Monday episodes, I've been doing what went right, what went wrong, and a shout out to a certain player for each of those games. But then I've still been with the 5 things you need to know for the weekday episodes and those 1 games to recap. But I'm going to go with the other version here. Let me know which way you like better, and we'll kind of go with that moving forward on the podcast. But what went right on Tuesday night? Not much, but Anthony Santander did make some history. His solo home run in the 3rd inning off of Nats starter Jake Irvin, who was phenomenal on Tuesday, continuing a great season, tied the game at 2. It was kind of all downhill from there for the O's, but took a fastball 3-0, swung and cracked it into the bullpen left center field. Cionel Perez made another catch with his hat on a home run. I think it's got to be 5 of those that he's done this year, which is pretty impressive. But he hit it 400 feet, 107 off the bat, and it is the 36th home run for Santander this year. It ties Shohei Ohtani for the 2nd most in baseball this year, only behind, of course, Aaron Judge. And it, of course, extended Santander's career high. But what it also did is set a new Orioles record for single-season home runs by a switch hitter. The previous record was held by Ken Singleton, who hit 35 homers as a switch hitter back in 1979. And Anthony Santander broke it with his 36th long ball on Tuesday night. And Ken Singleton is not just known for his time in Baltimore, but had a fantastic career with the Orioles. Kind of put that into perspective that Anthony Santander is passing Ken Singleton on Orioles leaderboards. And Anthony Santander is doing something that Eddie Murray never did. Eddie Murray hit 500 plus home runs and never hit 36 in a season with the O's. His season high was 33 in the World Series year in 1983. That's the most Murray ever hit in an Orioles uniform. Like, it is crazy impressive what Santander is doing. And you add it to the fact that, he's got a 134 WRC plus, 2.8 F-WAR. Those are both career highs. He's producing at a level he has never before at the plate for the O's, a former Rule 5 draft pick. And John Mioli, in his newsletter in the Baltimore Banner on Tuesday, even before Santander hit this homer, brought up the question of Santander's impending free agency. He is due to be a free agent this offseason. Santander last week kind of spoke to the media and let everyone know that he would love to re-sign in Baltimore, but also said there have not been any contract extension talks between his agent and the O's, at least during the season. Now, that's not super abnormal for any player. A lot of times they will try to keep negotiations to the offseason and don't want to be distracted by it during the season. So that's not too much of a red flag in terms of the Orioles' chances of keeping Santander around beyond this year. But I will say, with what he has done, it makes all the sense in the world to bring him back. Mioli wrote about in the newsletter about the potential of Santander maybe accepting the qualifying offer. If you're unfamiliar with how the qualifying offer works, it is a way that a team can offer a player who's an impending free agent a one-year deal. You can only offer a player this one time. And there is a set amount of money on that one-year deal. Last year, it was just over $20 million. The expectation is it would be about a one-year, $21 million deal that the qualifying offer would be for next season. You offer a player that. If he accepts it, great. You get him back for another year. Maybe you get another whole year to negotiate an extension. $21 million is, more than the O's have paid anybody in a long, long time. But for the way Santander is producing, if he's going to produce like this, he's worth $21 million, I think, over one season, especially with David Rubenstein opening up the checkbook a bit. It's more likely the O's could do that. But the other part of it is if Santander does decline it and sign with another team, you get draft pick compensation that the qualifying offer is supposed to help, quote unquote, lower or middle market teams, at least if they can't retain their free agents because they're outspent, they get something in return. But the other thing the qualifying offer has done to free agents in the past few years, it's made other teams less likely to sign them because that draft pick that you get, it gets taken away from the team that signs that player that has the qualifying offer on them. We've seen it with a lot of players the last 5 years or so in free agency. And it's a way that the O's could make Santander maybe less attractive to another team and get him back to Baltimore. Whether it is a multi-year extension, whether it is the qualifying offer, I get the whole, O'Hearn's producing in a similar spot and you should have Heston Kjerstad fully healthy, ready to go and be an everyday player in 2025. I get all of that. But those guys aren't producing at an Anthony Santander level. And I understand the fact that he's on the other side of 30 and he's not the most athletic guy in the world. He's already a corner outfielder and he's probably destined to be a DH at some point somewhat soon. He's still running around pretty well out there and making nice plays and playing right field almost every night for the Orioles. And I get, if someone offers him 4 years, $100 million, I don't know if the O's are going to match that because I don't think they want to give 4 years, $100 million to a player that, could break down here just age wise and skill level wise and what kind of player he is. I understand that, but you need to be doing what it takes to get Anthony Santander back on this team in the offseason. He is too important of a power productive bat in the middle of this lineup. And again, you see the argument, Heston Kjerstad will be cheaper. He'll be younger. You can make playing time for him, and he can do what Santander can do. And that's the key point. Can do. One day could do what Santander is doing. But he's not doing it now. And sometimes the grass isn't always greener. And it would be hard for me to just let Santander go and try to pencil in, 40 homers with a 130 plus WRC plus and really solid defense in right field if you're just sticking Heston Kjerstad out there. I love Heston Kjerstad. I don't know if he gives you that production next year, but you can get it from Santander. And I'm kind of in line with John Mioli's thoughts on this. Like, qualifying offer, if he can take it, I'd love an extension, but at the very least, you got to get him back in 2025. Now, what went wrong for the Orioles on Tuesday night? Well, that was Trevor Rogers. Now, this is his third start in an Oriole uniform since they acquired him from the Marlins at the trade deadline. First one in Cleveland was really bad. Last one in Toronto was honestly pretty good. This one was somewhere in the middle for Trevor Rogers. 5 innings plus. He did face the first batter of the sixth, allowed a single to the lefty James Wood, and then came out of the game. 5 runs, 5+ innings, 7 hits, 2 Ks, 2 walks on 78 pitches for Rogers. Now, the one good thing was He had been hit around pretty hard in the first two games, especially in Cleveland. Only 6 hard hit balls against him in this game is actually a really good positive sign for Rogers. Another positive sign was he threw 26 changeups. That was his most used pitch. And although he only got 2 swings and misses on that pitch, you love to see a pitcher using his best pitch more than any of his other offerings. When he threw the changeup, although it wasn't swing and miss, it was soft contact. It is his best pitch. Use it more. That was a good thing. The bad thing was, even though he threw a lot of strikes and he only walked 2 batters in 5 innings, it's not a terrible rate right there. What's the issue is the command within the zone. Like, yeah, he's throwing strikes, but he's not throwing them where you want him. He's putting fastballs when you're trying to throw them to the corner, to the middle of the plate. He's trying to throw sliders to the corner. He hung a lot of sliders. That was, I think, his biggest issue on Tuesday night. But the stuff looked better. So if he can combine the command maybe that started in Toronto with the stuff he had Tuesday night against the Nats, that change up and go into it a lot, okay, then maybe we are getting somewhere with Trevor Rogers. And the disaster of a rundown that allowed the second run at the end of the first inning, that certainly didn't help his line. That should have been a play where at the very least you hold the runner at third, he's safe at second, and at most you throw home and get the out at the plate to end the inning, especially with 2 strikes and 2 outs on the hitter at the plate. Just bad execution by the Orioles infield. But it's getting better. It's not amazing. He's struggling to finish batters off with 2 strikes. He only had 5 whiffs in total. And, the bullpen wasn't much better at all after him. I mean, Brian Baker came in and was a disaster. Keegan Aiken did not pitch well late in the game. Like, obviously the O's didn't go to the high leverage guys in the spot where they went to the pen, but he could be, at the very least, a guy who can help them get to the finish line if he can combine the good parts of the last 2 starts. Just keep the slider out of the middle of the plate. If he would have done that on Tuesday, I honestly think he would have pitched really, really well. The changeup was good. The fastball was better at times. Just can't throw sliders down the middle. I know the Nats aren't the best team in the world, but like, they got some hitters and they will hit a slider down the middle, and they certainly did on Tuesday. And then the shout out for this one, well, that goes to Gregory Soto. It has not been good for Gregory Soto since coming over at the trade deadline. First 3 outings out of the Oriole bullpen were not good. Then he came in kind of under the radar last week against Toronto, and 8th inning, O's were down by 5 or 6 runs, super low leverage spot, and he goes 1-2-3 with a strikeout. You're like, okay, like, there's no pressure on him. He's got good stuff. Like, of course he's going to do that. Well, the first 3 outings were so bad that was a big positive step. And then he did a very similar thing on Tuesday night. That was similarly very low leverage. Orioles trailing 7-2 in the top of the 7th inning. Not a lot of leverage in that outing for Gregory Soto, but he faced the middle of the order. It was 3-4-5 in the Nats lineup, starting with C.J. Abrams, and he looked really good. He went 1-2-3 again with a strikeout, only threw 8 pitches. He pounded the strike zone. It might have been 1 ball maybe out of the 8 pitches. Like, the command was really good. And on the final out of the inning, there was a slow chopper to his right. He made a really nice play coming off the mound, making a strong throw to get the 3rd out. And I understand these last 2 outings have been in super low leverage. And if the Orioles are going to go anywhere with this bullpen, they're going to need Gregory Soto to be good in much higher leverage situations down the stretch and potentially in the postseason. But this is a big step forward because of how bad it looked. I talked about it. It's not going to be that bad. It just can't be. His stuff's been too good. His past has been too good. This is more like the Soto we see. I'm not saying that tonight, if it's 2-1 in the 8th, Brandon Hyde's going to throw Soto out there to hold the lead. But I do think his next outing after these last 2 could be closer to leverage. Maybe the Orioles are down 3-2 in the 6th, then we see Gregory Soto next time to kind of build him back up to where the Orioles are going to need him to be as they go down the stretch this year. But it wasn't pretty across the board. Not much from the offense after the Santander homer. Not much from the pitching. It's a 9-3 loss to the Nats. It's a much better Nats team than it has been in the past. They got an influx of young talent, but not a great loss on your home field to the team down the road. But for the Orioles, I was talking about Anthony Santander, his impending free agency. He's not the only impending free agent. The way I'm kind of looking at it is the Orioles have, we'll say, 7 impending free agents this offseason. What should they do with all of them? How likely are they to re-sign all of them? We'll get to that coming up after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Liquid IV. When you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's Popsicle Firecracker flavor, a surefire summer hit. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Because baseball and summer, well, they go together like liquid IV and indulgent hydration. I think the best part about liquid IV is honestly like whether it's a workout, long flight, hot day outside, after a night out, whatever it is, it's such quick hydration for you. Like it gets you back on your feet and gets you back to where you need to be. You tear, you pour, you live more. One stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. And I'm a huge water drinker. That's all I do all day is drink water. But even liquid IV can help me be even more hydrated. So no more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. How do you play? Well, all you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then you just watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Major League Baseball on every night. You pick some players more or less on their stat lines, and you can win some money. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So I talked about how the Orioles should be going after in whatever it is, whether it's qualifying offer, whether it's extension, longer term than that, to bring back Anthony Santander as he is an impending free agent. And I'm going to say the Orioles have a group of 7 players who are impending free agents. Now, some of these guys do have options for 2025. Those are guys like Craig Kimbrell and Eloy Jimenez. And there are other guys who are not on this list who also have options. Those are guys like Danny Coulombe. Those are guys like Sir Anthony Dominguez. Those are guys like Ryan O'Hearn. These are guys that I'm just like, the Orioles are absolutely going to pick up the options on those guys and bring them back in 25. So I'm not really going to put them on this list. So my list of 7, Corbin Burns, Anthony Santander, Eloy Jimenez, John Means, Austin Slater, Craig Kimbrell, James McCann. Those are your 7. I decided to rank them, and I'll talk a lot more about these guys as the season winds down, really more once the Orioles season itself is over and we get into the offseason and start thinking about free agency. That's when I'll really dive into these guys. But I thought, I gave that whole conversation about re-signing Santander. Maybe it's a good time right now in mid-August to just talk about that upcoming offseason and what it's going to look like for the Orioles. And so I ranked them from 1 to 7, from most to least likely for the Orioles to re-sign. This is not what I want them to do. This is what I think is most likely for the O's. And number 7 on the list, so least likely, I think would be Austin Slater. Like, not that he couldn't have some big hits down the stretch for the Orioles. He certainly could. That could put him in the good graces of the franchise and the fans. I just think he's such a patchwork, filling a hole for the rest of the season player that they brought in on a super minor trade, right before the deadline passed for cash from the Cincinnati Reds after having kind of a bad season. He's a guy who has some upside, hits lefties, plays pretty solid defense in all 3 outfield spots, but I just think the Orioles will be able to find other options like that to bring in next year or call up prospects who could do that as well. There's a chance they could bring him back, but I just think he's the most like, okay, patch it up this year and go on your way player. Number 6, I think, unfortunately, is John Means. Now, he just underwent his second Tommy John surgery in basically 2+ years. He is out for the rest of the season. He's going to be out for a good chunk of 2025 as well, and he is also a free agent after this year. And I do know that there haven't been any kind of, at least, extension talks between the Orioles and Means. There haven't been for a while. It's just so unfortunate how his tenure with the Orioles ended. I mean, I love that he's still, periodically with the team, and I know he's going to be with them in the postseason, and hopefully the O's can get him a ring before he goes on his way. And I really do hope another team will sign him. I just don't know if the O's are going to do it anyway. Now, especially when you won't have him for at the very least, the pre-All-Star break portion of 2025, and it could be even more time that he misses next year. I don't know if the O's go for that. I think somebody will probably give him a 2-year deal where, it's kind of a prove it year 1, give us whatever you can, but then we're really looking for you in 2026. I honestly hope, if it's not the Orioles, which I don't think it'll be, that the Royals give him that kind of deal. They could use some more starting pitching. That's where he's from, Kansas City. That's kind of his hometown team. I think that would be really cool if Means got a 2-year deal from a team that's kind of up and coming as well, having a great year trying to get to the playoffs this season. Number 5 on my list is Corbin Burnes. Now, in terms of what I want the Orioles to do, Corbin Burnes would be probably number 1 on my list to bring back this ace, but just with what he is going to cost. I mean, you're looking at a guy who's going to look for a 6 to 7, maybe even 8-year deal in free agency. The Orioles, I don't think, are going to pay a starting pitcher into his mid to late 30s. And a guy who's going to look for a Garrett Cole type deal where he's going to try to get $30 million per year or more. I mean, you're looking at, on the low side, I mean, maybe a 7-year, $200 million deal is something like Corbin Burnes is going to go after, and where David Rubenstein is certainly not John Angelos, and the O's are in a different category now in terms of willingness to pay players in free agency. I just think, A, Mike Elias is still going to be worried about giving that many years to a pitcher, and B, there's going to be other teams with deep pockets willing to pay Burnes that money and maybe even more than that to get a legitimate ace like Corbin Burnes. Even though he's been a little bit of a different pitcher here with the Orioles this year, he is still a legitimate ace in Major League Baseball. And I would love to have him back. I just don't see it as crazy optimistic that he would be back in an Oriole uniform. Number 4 is Craig Kimbrell. I had no idea where to put him, so I put him right in the middle. He's been good at times. He's been bad at times. You hope you'll have a fully healthy and operational Felix Bautista. The O's do have an option they could pick up on Kimbrell, so it's not as hard as just, crushing out a brand new deal with him. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'll have to see what these last 2 months look like before I make that decision. That's why I threw him right in the middle of this list. Obviously, he'll be much cheaper than a guy like Burnes, so maybe that's why he's above him. But yeah, just throw him in the middle. Number 3 is Eloy Jimenez. Jimenez has 2 player options for 2025 and 26, but they are worth $16.5 million for next year and $18.5 million for the year after. Even if Jimenez stays red hot down the stretch for the Orioles, the fact that he's still got injury concerns, even if he's healthy, I'm not really sure he can play the field anymore. He's mostly a DH. There's still issues with him hitting the ball in the air. Even if the O's want him back, they're not picking up a $16.5 million option for him next year. But what they could do is decline it and then try to sign him in free agency on a 1 or 2 year deal, probably more like 1, that's a little more in the $8 to $9 million range to bring him back as kind of a bench bat and a guy who plays against lefties. He's hitting around 500 as an Oriole. If he keeps doing that, they're going to bring him back. Now, obviously, he's not going to hit 500 down the stretch, but if he gets healthy and he works on the launch angle a bit and starts hitting the ball in the air and continues to produce, and he likes it here after, obviously, I would think, being miserable with the White Sox the past couple of years, maybe the O's can get him to take a 1-year, $9 or $10 million deal and bring him back to be a weapon off the bench. Number 2 for me is James McCann. Does he produce with the bat a lot? Not really, but he's been seemingly a fantastic backup catcher for the Orioles for the last 2 years since they acquired him in that trade with the Mets. I think he's kind of perfect. I wouldn't give him any kind of multi-year deal, but if McCann's willing to come back for 1 year, $7, $8, $9, $10 million to be Adley's backup for at least 1 more year, kind of bridging the gap 1 more before Samuel Basallo is hopefully here and ready to go in 2026. I think that would be perfect. Yeah, there are other options out there, but my fix it if it ain't broken. McCann's been a great fit for this team. I just think the Orioles and him would both be really interested in that reunion for at least 1 more year, and hopefully they can get that done. And then number 1 on my list is the guy we've talked about, Anthony Santander. I think not only do the Orioles need to do it, I think it's most likely. I know, as I mentioned, Mike Elias might not be willing to pay that 4 years, $100 million, but with the qualifying offer in play, with the production he's given the middle of this lineup, with the checkbook opening from David Rubenstein, I just think all things are going to come together this offseason. And even if it just is a 1-year deal in the qualifying offer, for Santander to be in an Orioles uniform on opening day in 2025, I hope it happens. And I think it will happen as well. We got 1 more segment to get to, though. We're talking some Orioles minor league news. That'll come up next to finish off the pod. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Ibotta. It's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. You can stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs. You can get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. And the average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. Sounds pretty good to me. And other apps that give you points that don't mean much, Ibotta just gives you cash that you can withdraw and put in your bank account. Doesn't get much easier than that. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app, start earning cash back, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So to finish off today's episode, just wanted to run through some minor league notes that have happened over the past few weeks, just haven't been able to get to them. This is not going to include everything from the minors. There's been some actually really cool and exciting promotions at the minor league level over the past couple of weeks with guys moving up levels. If you want to hear about those, Orioles on the Verge is your spot. You know that for all the Orioles minor league podcast coverage. But back over here, just things we like to talk about. First of all, there's a few more undrafted free agent signings that the Orioles made after the draft. They actually made 31 signings in total. So they signed all 21 of their draft picks, which was great. Also brought in 10 undrafted free agents. And I realized, I believe that there were 3 that I still had not talked about. Mentioned Ben Vespi last week, brother of Nick Vespi, who they brought in. 3 more that the O's brought in, though. Number 1 is Joe Glassy, right-handed reliever, a 4-year reliever at Illinois. Pretty good 2024, 4.93 ERA, not great, but a 6% walk rate to a 24% strikeout rate, 8 saves in 35 innings. Low 90s fastball with some sinks, got a curveball, a slider, a changeup, a closer at a Big Ten school. You take your chance on a reliever like that and see what he can do for you in the minor leagues. Next one is another right-handed pitcher in Jacob Stretch. He is a 21-year-old righty out of Virginia Tech. Pitched his first and only season with the Hokies this year. Had a 5.32 ERA in 22 innings, 19% strikeout rate to a 12%, 19% strikeout rate to a 12% walk rate. It's a low 90s fastball with some breaking stuff. This is a guy right here. You are just banking on the stuff. It is not about the performance because it wasn't very good. It is about the stuff and how you can develop him. He did pitch 2 years at Frostburg before transferring to Virginia Tech, so knows the area a little bit, and we'll see what the O's can do from him. And finally, guess what? It's another right-handed pitcher. It is Kenny Leaner out of Limestone College, a Division II school in South Carolina, where he was at one point on the roster, but did not play at Limestone in 2024. No stats, no bio, seemingly was not on the team. Now, he started his career at Brunswick Community College in North Carolina for 2 seasons in 2021 and 2022 as just a hitter. Then he transferred to Division I Western Carolina in 2023, where he was mostly a hitter, but he pitched a little bit and basically started his conversion to a pitcher, then went to Limestone seemingly to pitch, but the reporting seems to be that he was academically ineligible at Limestone this spring and so was not able to pitch, then came out and pitched in the summer. The Orioles obviously like what they saw. D1 Baseball had a good report on him. It's a low 3/4 delivery, a fastball 94 to 96 with a good slider. And that's somebody with not a lot of wear and tear on the arms. He has barely pitched in games at all, really just started doing it last year. So not a bad project to go after and see if the O's can turn him into some sort of reliever. Really like these interesting, like 2-way guys, haven't pitched for long, see what the O's can do as a mold in the minor leagues. But I would say the worst part of the Major League Baseball draft is that, especially with the contraction of the minor leagues, less minor league teams, less minor league roster spots, guys get released after the draft every year. And there were a good chunk of Orioles players that were released. There was a good chunk of them from like the DSL or the FCL or low ball, where names you might not know. Really, there were 4 upper minor league players who were released that you would know the name of, and the Orioles had definitely put some development work into and just didn't work out over the past few years. First one is right-handed pitcher Connor Loprich, who was a 20th round pick of the Pirates in 2018, and the Orioles acquired him for cash in 2020. Had a 4.91 ERA in Bowie as a reliever last year. He was injured this season. The Orioles let him kind of rehab with the team. He came back in July. He pitched in 1 rehab game in the FCL in July and then was released. Not sure exactly what the situation was there, but the Orioles, it may have been kind of a good thing by the O's. Hey, we'll let you rehab with us where it's easier to rehab with the team. Better for him financially, obviously. And then we'll let you get out there and throw in a game one time so other teams can see you. Hopefully Loprich does find another stop for him. Wanderson Charles was also released, a guy who, people were kind of high on in spring training this year that we thought could help the Orioles bullpen at some point in 2024. 27-year-old high velocity guy, signed with the O's on a minor league deal before 2023, had a good season, re-signed with the O's on another minor league deal, but then he had a 5.70 ERA in 30 innings in AAA Norfolk with a 20% walk rate. When you have a 10% walk rate, you're like, this guy might need to throw some more strikes. He had a 20% walk rate. He was sent down to Double-A, didn't get better, and then was released. Hopefully Charles can find how to throw strikes, because that stuff, 100-mile-per-hour fastball, nasty cutter, like it could work for someone, just didn't work for the O's. Dante Williams was the most recent release, left-handed hitting outfielder that the O's took in the 4th round of the 2021 draft out of Arizona. This year in Double-A, 400 plate appearances, hit just 194 with an 86 WRC plus. He is an incredible, and when I say incredible, I mean it, incredible defensive center fielder. It was like once a week you see an incredible defensive play highlight from Dante Williams in center field in Bowie. Issue was he never hit, was never even got himself to a league average hitter in the minors. At that point, the O's just felt the need to cut ties. The bat just wasn't coming around. That's how he was drafted. Great glove, got to figure out the bat, and unfortunately, he never did. And then the one that hurt the most is maybe the minor leaguer besides the top prospects that I've talked about the most on this podcast, and that is Maxwell Costas, who was an undrafted free agent signing by the Orioles after the 2022 draft out of Maryland, a guy who I got to know very well in my time working with the Maryland baseball program during his freshman year at Maryland, my senior year as the radio broadcaster in 2019, when he had an amazing first year as the Terps first baseman, won Big Ten Freshman of the Year, and ended up having a really good 4-year career at Maryland as their first baseman there for a while. Now, he's a solid first baseman, doesn't really have another position. The O's tried him at third base and in the outfield some in Aberdeen. He did make it to Bowie last year, but he went back to Aberdeen this year, hit just 211 with a sub 600 OPS without a real position. He was actually their emergency pitcher for a while there, and I think had a 0 ERA when he was pitching in games when the Ironbirds ran out of pitchers. But sad to see Maxwell released. Hopefully, if he wants to continue the baseball career, that he can certainly find a spot with another minor league organization. Just a really interesting, just fantastic guy, and really, really good baseball guy to get to know, and what kind of drives him off the field as well. So hopefully if he wants to keep playing, that he can find another job in Major League Baseball. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Orioles are back in action tonight against the Nats. You do not want to lose the Masson Cup. So if they can get this W tonight, they will split the 4 games in the 2024 season. It is DJ Hers going for the Nationals, rookie left-hander who has a 4.41 ERA but has some insane strikeout stuff. It is fun to watch. Now, he has had his moments, right? He has had his moments where it hasn't gone very well, like his last start, where he only lasted 2 2/3 and he walked 4 batters. But he also has some starts where he struck out 10 plus. We'll see which DJ Hers the O's see, and they'll go up against Dean Kramer. The O's will send Kramer out there. It hasn't been super pretty lately. Last couple of starts have not been amazing. Defense hasn't really helped him out the last couple times out there, so hopefully Kramer can turn it around in tonight's game at 6:35. Then I'll be back with you to recap game 2 between the O's and the Nats, and of course, get you any more Orioles news and notes that you may need. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.